Again, you see none. I need a motion for the adoption of minutes from our November 24th meeting. Moved by, I need a couple of hands here, please. Peter, seconded by Michelle, thank you. All in favor, I'll just say yay. Okay, thank you. Okay, we are very excited to have Erin Lee here from Lanark County Interval House. She was at council a couple of weeks ago to talk about her mosaic, and we thought it'd be appropriate that she come to the task force to do her presentation and be available for any questions. So Erin.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to come in and join all of you. I did send Nadine a PowerPoint, but I do want to start by saying when I think about your task force, and first applaud you for having a task force that speaks to the issues of race and discrimination. I think it's important to understand that people of color, Indigenous people, sex workers, those are some of the people who won't engage the systems. And they won't engage the systems because of the backlash and the discrimination. And women are a big part of those communities and those populations who won't access kind of mainstream services without building trust and building relationships. And I think it's really important that we understand that when we talk about our rural community and the realities of violence. Before I get into the PowerPoint, I also want to share that the pandemic has brought some realities, and I speak to it in the presentation, but I want to tell you that statistically in 2020, 2021, we had 4,817 crisis calls to our crisis line. So, you know, when we think about an overall population of about 66,000 plus, typically in a year, we see about 2,500 calls, and that would have been pre-pandemic. And since the pandemic, we've seen increases of about 75% in terms of our call rates just on our crisis lines. So I think it is important to know that. I think it's important to know that while we maybe only had 82 women access the shelter in that period of a year, and with them 34 children, it is important to know that our community-based service supported 335 women in the community and 64 children. So again, when we start to look at those numbers and we think about our small population, it is important to know that the pandemic has exacerbated the issues of violence, the issues of discrimination, the issues of barriers and stigma to service access. So I applaud your efforts in having struck a task force on these very issues. And I want you to know that it's real. What's happening in our community is real in terms of our numbers and in terms of our realities. I don't know, Nadine, if you want me to try and screen share or if you're going to pull it up.
I can pull it up for you. And if you just say next slide, then I'll advance the slide for you. Okay?
Sure. So it wasn't really 100% clear. You can go ahead and share, Nadine. It wasn't 100% clear exactly what Chris had wanted for today's presentation, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what we know at Lanark County Interval House and how it kind of coincides with the issues of discrimination. So Lanark County Interval House, as you can see by the number of logos, has existed in your community since 1979. You can move forward to the next slide. And we have been embraced by this community, and that's why we're here. You keep us here. So we believe that a woman and her children have a right to live with dignity and without the threat of violence. And when this right is denied or interfered with, we'll provide protection and support. You can forward the next slide. We work from a pillared approach. A lot of people think that Lanark County Interval House provides a shelter and that's all. We work from the pillars of prevention, education and prevention, emergency response, transition support, and advocacy. So we cover all of those circles. You can move to the next slide. And we really want to engage with community around understanding the issues of intimate partner violence. If you read these slides in more detail, you will see that 25% of women and 10% of men experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. What we know is that when you add location and you add race and you add ethnicity and you add all of the other elements related to equity, you see that those risks and rates will increase significantly. If you are a biracial woman like me, your risk is increased. If you are a person of color or a member of the Black community or an Indigenous person, your rates and risk increase. If you are a woman with a disability, and so on. Those things are layered in their approach in terms of how our systems negate the realities of people, and as a result, we see the increase in risk. You can forward to the next slide, please. So I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about what unhealthy relationships look like. And I think that when we talk about what's happening in Smiths Falls and what we're going to do with Smiths Falls, you can go ahead, Nadine, and forward when you're ready. Things like jealousy and possessiveness, control issues, being bossy, giving orders, making all the decisions, putting you down in front of your friends, making you feel scared. Those are signs, right? That there are choices that we all need to make, and we're responsible for those choices so that we can get out or move on. Threats are a reality, and in rural Lanark County, people are 30% more likely to be threatened by use of a weapon, just because we are a hunting community, and often weapons are more readily available. If you know that people are starting to worry, or you observe things in relationships that speak to being unhealthy, those are the what we refer to as red flags. If you move on to the next slide, you'll see, Nadine, that and the group that we talk about how things escalate. And there's a history, that person maybe had a history of fighting. They grab or push or shove you, and that escalates to hitting. They are too serious about the relationship too fast. And certainly that is one of the realities, especially with younger people in our community. And then you add to the mix alcohol and drugs. And people often blame alcohol and drugs for violence and acts of violence. It's not the root cause of violence. It escalates the acts of violence. It might be more violent than one might have anticipated, but it's not the root cause of why we have violence in our community. Often we don't know that someone's had a history of failed relationships and blames the other person for all the problems. And then friends and family are often uneasy around the relationship, and they're concerned for your safety. Those are red flags, and they're red flags that we need to talk about and pay attention to. So let's talk a little bit about the impacts of the pandemic on that. If we move to the next slide, gender-based violence itself is a pandemic. It's uncontrolled, it's widespread, and it's ongoing. We could be in South Africa, we can be in Nairobi, we can be in Smiths Falls, or we can be in Almont. And gender-based violence is a pandemic. A national survey found domestic violence during the pandemic was more frequent and more severe. And that was Canada and London, May to July of 2020. We can tell you from our stats that I mentioned earlier that definitely we're having an increased amount of calls, and we have people talking to us about more serious incidents of violence. Almost half of those surveyed said they noticed changes in the prevalence and severity of violence, with 82% saying the violence increased and got more frequent. There have been many more cases of strangulation and serious physical assaults, leading to higher risk of lethality. Strangulation, often commonly referred to as choking, has become a greater and greater issue for many communities of people to be concerned about, including ours. And we're currently trying to arrange for Necka McGregor to come and do a training in Lanark County in the town of Smiths Falls to talk about femicide and to talk about strangulation as a much more common tool or threat of violence and lethality, and the adrenaline and the trauma that's connected to violence. Often when you're choking or you're strangling somebody, that push becomes more uncontrollable, which is why there's a higher risk of lethality. If we move to the next slide and we continue to talk about the pandemic, it doesn't cause domestic violence, it exacerbates it. There are more tools and more chances to control your victim. You can't go out, you can't go anywhere. You have to stay home. You have a government reinforcing that you have to stay home. The choices began to just disappear. The isolation grew. Children weren't going to school. We had less eyes on the kids in terms of them expressing or telling us what was going on at home. Financial stress, as people know, can also be experienced during a time of crisis, particularly amongst the most vulnerable populations. We don't want to spend any time likely talking about the truckers convoy, but we know that our grocery store shelves are looking more sparse. We know that a loaf of bread is more money than it was 2 years ago. And we know that there's not an increase in accessible funds for families to be able to manage. Homeschooling created an increase in stress, and certainly there's no blame or shame to anybody in terms of having to worry about the stress and health and well-being of people during a pandemic that's causing death. But I think that the reality is that this created and breathed life into the cycle of violence in terms of its control. There has been an increase, as you all know very well, that there's been an increase in alcohol and drug use as a way to cope during the pandemic. So if we look at the next slide very quickly around the cycle of violence, you can see how the cycle of violence generally works, right? You have the honeymoon stage and all is good, and love is everywhere, and we feel the little butterflies, and then there's tension building, and then there's a blow up, and then there's the makeup. And if you advance the slide, you'll see the arrows that go around and show you how that cycle works. And what I would say to you is generally, as this cycle of violence increases in the number of incidents and the time in between the incidents lessens. And with the pandemic, we have seen the honeymoon stages virtually non-existent. The tension is ongoing. The blowups are frequently more severe, and the I'm sorry is leads right into the next level of tension building because it hasn't been addressed. So, not wanting to paint the worst picture in the world, but, if we advance to the next slide, things that women will tell you that they need in order to be supportive and how you can help them with it is they need to be safe. And if you, it's a fancy PowerPoint, Nadine, so if you just forward at your own leisure, you'll see all the points that women need to be safe. They need to know their kids will be safe. They need you to notice that they need your help. They need you to believe and support them. They need to be able to trust. They need you to respond to their choices and respect their choices. They need information, practical help, and they need you to care for yourself as you're helping them. And they need to have what everybody speaks to as a normal life. In a pandemic, a normal life is very hard for us to even imagine in terms of what the new normal is. So if you look at that slide and you think about discrimination and you think about racism and you think about these things that people need, it is important to know about the intersections, and it's important to know I need to be safe, but I don't know the resources. I worry about the stigma. I worry about the judgment. I worry about the backlash to my family. I worry about the system judging me. And so I don't actually know how to move on to be able to trust the system to help me get safer. right? I need to know my kids will be safe, especially in vulnerable communities and diverse communities. You know, the system of child protection is challenging. So if we think about the Indigenous community, we think about people of color, it's very difficult to think about, I need my kids to be safe, which means I need to acknowledge that I need help to make sure that they're safer. And sometimes the system appears to be one of the barriers because there's so many fears about the judgment, the stigma. How will they engage in my life? I need you to believe me and support me. It seems like a really interesting and really easy thing, right? Someone tells you they're experiencing violence, you want to validate that experience. But when we look at the intersections of discrimination and racism, we have seen historically false suggestions of belief and validation. So there are so many things that make it difficult for families, and in our case, our agency works with women and their children, for them to be able to make those choices, feel respected, and navigate our systems and build those trusting relationships. Because historically, and for some current day, it's been very difficult to feel like the systems are really navigating the support that they need. If you advance to the next slide, because I know that it's a 10-minute delegation and I'm very mindful of those things, I wanted to get to this slide to make sure that you know that we are working on responding to femicide in our community, that we are hosting a community forum on February the 16th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. responding to femicide. That is being hosted in partnership between Lanark County Interval House, the Smiths Falls Police, and Victim Services. And that is in response to murder. All right. It's in response to the femicide and looking at our community and talking to our community. As Mayor Panko mentioned, we are working on the Pebble Mosaic art installation, honoring those living with gender-based violence. And that'll be located in the town of Smiths Falls. It'll be a place for gathering and reflecting. We are working with some of your local schools to provide some education and some support, because loss is not just through femicide, it's through drug overdose, it's through other means, and we need to be supporting each other in our systems. So we had some great meetings last week. For those of you who are familiar with the See It, Name It, Change It campaign that started as a result of rural murders in Eastern Ontario between Renfrew County, our county, and Lennox and Addington, we are reviving it. We had a meeting with Renfrew County just the other day, and so we are working in partnership with them to respond and unite against femicide, and trying to encourage people to use the language to understand the ongoing discrimination and oppression that women have faced for years and for generations. If you advance to the last slide, you will see that that's the See It, Name It, Change It logo, and there is a billboard in your community on Highway 15. There is now, if you check out that billboard has now changed, and there's a splash at the bottom that says Stop Racism. And the other billboard on Highway 7 for See It, Name It, Change It also has the same splash related to ending racism and stopping racism. We feel like the two are connected, and there's not the billboard gives us an opportunity to connect the intersections and to hope that people will pay attention to that. And the campaign comes from a place of, when we were all kids and we learned about fire when we were in school, it didn't matter if you went to school in Smiths Falls, Toronto, or Hamilton, we learned about fire. And what we learned was stop, drop, and roll. And people kind of chuckle when I say that to them, because that's generally what you learned. And if we had a campaign when we were kids that taught us to, if we see violence, we name violence, we could change violence, then maybe we would be in a much better place in our world in terms of being able to make it okay and make it encouraged to talk about violence in communities, violence in relationships, and how to decipher, what is play and what is hurt, right? So that is being revived, and I would encourage you to participate and when you see it, name it, and if you name it, we can change it. I think I am probably close to 10 minutes, so I will thank you for your time and your intention, and I would say to you that a 10-minute delegation is more than some folks are doing, so bravo. But in terms of the issues of violence and discrimination and your task force work, I think that there's lots more work we need to do to continue to build on the connections between violence, racism, and discrimination. So thank you very much. And I see my colleague and my friend Chris joining us, and I know that a talking circle is something that we've talked about many times in conversation, and I do believe that a talking circle would be very helpful for the task force and for the community. But I think for many of you, it's your first time meeting me, and it's your first time seeing my face and hearing me talking about the issues of violence, that starting with a talking circle may not be something that you would feel trustworthy about in terms of your own safety and your own vulnerabilities. So I thank you for your time. I hope that I have shared some relevant information, and I will remain here to respond to any questions or comments you might have.
Well, Aaron, thank you. And no worries about a 10-minute limit on any delegation or presentation from you. You have so much value to bring to our community, and obviously we can't thank you enough for the role that you and Integral Health plays in trying to keep our women and our families safe and protected from gender-based violence. I will open the floor up to any questions. And Chris, I see your hand is up already. So Chris, you're first.
Yes, hi, Aaron Chimegwech. I want to thank you so much for coming. I myself have been, over the years, as a grassroots women and children's advocate, involved before our task force in dealing with, sadly, misogyny and examples of violence within our community. Some I've had to intervene in. And in actual fact, that's why I had actually hoped for us to have a talking circle. Obviously, you all know that I have been given the honor to walk with missing and murdered Indigenous families across the country, and that I have also been given the honor to speak on behalf of at least one of those families and carry their daughter's picture. And in that particular case, the campaign Shine the Light was in London, Ontario, created, and Terry Ann was brutally murdered through domestic violence and was the first Indigenous woman to be used in that campaign. I would like to encourage that we also consider, I know that Charlene, I believe, has talked about it from Brockville in the past, to also add Shine the Light to our work here in the community as a way to respond to violence. Because I do walk with missing and murdered Indigenous families, the other
Sorry, Chris. Repeat that, please.
Said that unfortunately, Indigenous sisters are at least 6 to 7 times greater at risk than I would be. And so that's a really crucial reason that I feel so strongly about the importance of addressing even the smallest signs, as you spoke about, whether or not it be through vandalism or intimidation through words or actual violence, which when the groggery had been given permission to reopen, a young woman on July 1st was literally slammed on the pavement in front of my eyes and could have been killed or definitely severely injured. So we have to, I believe, and respect, and please correct me, Aaron, if I'm wrong, we have to be aware that we cannot not continue the dialogue, that there isn't just November or February 14th or Red Dress Day that, you know, a wonderful member of our community does here as well, that in my opinion now with recent events, I hope, will make a commitment to looking at where we have lacked in the past, as well as what we have done in a positive light, because there are areas that we have lacked. And I think that unless you speak those truths, that's why I was honored to hold the feather I've been given by families of missing and murdered women. We really are not going forward in the direction that our task force has the possibility to go forward in. I am a supporter and I do stand with Erin. So obviously I'd be very happy if down the road Erin does conduct that talking circle, because I'd like to share more incidences. I just sort of gave one of the worst events that I saw myself in the community about 3.5, 4 years ago that did leave some trauma for me, because the reality is you can't walk with families or talk about violence and not experience the effects of it through doing what you can to change things. But it requires all of us, and that's why too, Erin, forgive me for being late. If I did not hear you say something about allyship, this is a time where we really need to look at the male members of our community in this task force to really be aware that they will support us by letting us share our thoughts and feelings and leads, but obviously not letting even the smallest act of misogyny take place, which is, Erin, what I think I came into you talking about. So this is where I really think going forward, because of the experiences that I've had, I would like to encourage our committee to really have also more dialogue on a regular basis that includes updated racism, anti-racism training for our police force, because we have a wonderful police force, but one of the problems is when I wanted to speak to our police chief about missing and murdered women, it took me a year and he was not very responsive. And then the other thing that was a difficulty is when I asked for a remarkable female officer trained and working with the domestic violence community, Jody MP, I was not able to access her. And as a woman, I have to share with you that was incredibly offensive for me, because when a woman makes a request of wanting to speak to a female officer, will not be everyone's choice, but for some of us, it's a crucial thing for very varying reasons of having that opportunity. So, I mean, this is another example of a personal aside that I think I need to share, and why I feel our training needs to be more adequate than it has been. And I think through what you're saying, Erin, and through how we will go forward, that will mean that when a female in our community, myself or any female in our community, requests for a female to be involved in helping them, we need to respect that they know what they need and want. And we think it doesn't matter, but let me tell you, in my experience, that even is the beginning of a disrespect. It's not intentional. Sometimes it's done unknowingly, but when it is pointed out, we do have to be open. So thank you so much. Sure.
I think, Chris, I just wanted to, if I could, Mayor Panko, just say to Chris that, I appreciate your passion, and I know that you have years of experience of various things here and there. I genuinely care about engaging in a talking circle and about healing and about changing our community. I think that what we're talking about in terms of whether it's shine the light or see it, name it, change it, is about opportunities to dialogue, opportunities to educate. We are hosting trauma-informed training, specifically 2 days with Lori Gill for police services, just around looking at how we can increase our capacity with our police services around trauma-informed approach. I think that it is important that you know that we are bringing bystander training to our community through Juliette Lalonde, because I think that people need to be empowered safely to be able to find their courage to speak out. And I think, Chris, you are a formidable advocate who's willing to make sure her voice is heard. And I think there are lots of people in our community that see things that don't necessarily even connect the dots. You know, you and I had a conversation some years ago about a flag, and people don't always connect the dots on what that means. So we're doing bystander training, we're doing trauma-informed training in our community, and we're going to connect with the program called Cut It Out. And Cut It Out is a program that is delivered to estheticians and salons that helps those folks recognize signs of violence and how to respond when somebody's sitting in a chair, getting their hair cut, and starts to talk about risk factors. How do we empower our community members with tools so that they're willing to take a stand and say something, because people don't want to also compromise your safety or their own safety. So I think that mitigating those things, that well, it's very powerful what you share, Chris, in terms of the oppression. I think it's the steps and the planning that goes into that will really create an impact. And if I came here and said, we're going to do a talking circle, and here's the talking stick, and this is how it'll be passed, and this is what I want you to talk about, people may have shut down because of those vulnerabilities that I was asking them to break open, and they don't know me. So it's about relationship building. It's about building trust. And I think that the other thing I just want to say is that the art mosaic, when the art mosaic started with Red Dress Productions, it started rooted in Indigenous communities and about Indigenous women's experience, murdered, missing, and assaulted. And so I really encourage you to be involved in the Pebble Mosaic. The elder, Roberta, is involved in, she's one of the artists, but she's our elder and she's our leader. She leads us through really great expressions of intention for us to try to unload and unpack some of our history. So I just wanted to say that in response to Chris, that I think that, we can all continue to work in partnership and grow our understanding and grow our capacity to offer trainings that are meaningful. And if you offer an anti-racism, anti-oppression training, no one's coming. Nobody's coming because those words shut people down. Right? If you talk about building an inclusive community, people will come. If you use language that already scares people because of their fear and they haven't unpacked their own white privilege, they're not coming with the right intention. We need to get people in a room first. Then we need to make sure that they understand that their vulnerabilities are okay to share and talk about. And when they learn about the vulnerabilities of others, they can recognize their own privilege, right? We need to unpack all of those things, and we need to be really strategic to make our community not feel that there are sides and there's a divide. The last thing I'm going to say is, people are infuriated. They're infuriated with truckers talking about freedom. Right? Because when you think about freedom, you're not thinking about people of color and Chinese head tax and Black slavery and the history of Indigenous. You're not thinking about that when you stand as a white trucker and talk about your freedom of choice, right? You're not thinking about those layers, which means you haven't integrated the kind of racism and discrimination in your analysis that will help people hear your issue. So there's a lot of work to do. As someone who was formerly an anti-racism trainer, there's a lot of work to do. When you go into the North and you're coming together with an Indigenous community and a primarily white community, you need to figure out how to unpack and make that okay for everyone. And while we don't want to talk about white people's, vulnerabilities and taking care of white people, we also have to recognize that they're not going to come to the table if what we're shouting at them is you're bigots, racist, misogynistic idiots. But come to this training so that you can learn how to unpack and be better. We need to figure out how to get people at the table and invested in really the systems, right? Invested in changing the systems in Smiths Falls. So when a woman calls the police respond and she feels heard and responded to, right? We need to change the system. And by doing that, we're going to change the community and people, because we're going to ask them to reflect and to invest in unpacking their own privilege and use their privilege to make room for others. So I know I might sound like I'm ranting a little bit, but I always feel like it's important to help ground people, especially when it's been a long time of frustration and wanting for change. And Chris, I'm down with change, you know that, and I so does the mayor. And anything I can do to support this move forward, I would be honored to do so.
Well, Aaron, thank you. And I think we could sit here and listen to you all day and learn from you. And please feel free to share the training sessions, more details, if you don't mind, back to Nadine and can circulate. Any further questions to Aaron? I don't see any. So Aaron, we really appreciate you being here today. And I think we look to you for ongoing guidance and mentoring. And I'll come back to you in a second, Peter, and help us understand how we can do a better job helping our community and the steps we can make, any programs we can endorse, the training that we can circulate. We really look to you for being that mentor to us so that we can do the best we can to serve the benefit of the people of our community. Peter?
Thank you, everyone. I was hesitant to bring it up. It's 35 years ago almost that a young woman in Smith Falls was murdered in a remote part of town that the town is revitalizing that area with interesting lighting, and we're going to do some work there. And I raise it because one of my colleagues, Chris McGuire, brought up that when we were thinking about a place to reflect, people go there to watch the sunset across the Rideau. And we wondered, as opposed to the town square, we wondered if that was not a better place for a mosaic or a spot to, it honors her and other women who are victims, who've been murdered, but it is a place where the community naturally goes to reflect and watch the scenery. It's so complicated because it's Parks Canada and the town and everything gets complicated. But I just wanted to plant the seed that we jumped quickly to location, and location's important, but what are we really trying to do here? And so I didn't want to get into a conversation with it today, but I wanted to at least introduce it to my colleagues and friends today.
Right. Thank you, Peter. Okay, Aaron, again, thank you for being here today, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and providing the guidance to us. And I think we will look forward to having you back at some point in time. And we're not sure the future of this task force and whether it evolves into an inclusion and equality committee at some point in time. But we look to you for guidance, and we know that we can do more, and please help us do more. You're welcome to stay on. You're welcome to move on.
Anything I can do.
Thanks again. Okay, moving ahead with our agenda, we have our interim report, which Nadine has prepared. We wanted to make sure that we were able to bring a report to council once it's been supported by the task force, because there are a number of steps we'd like to see happen, and we need council's endorsement to do so. So Nadine, over to you.
Okay, I can, I'm just going to share the screen just so everyone can see it, if that's okay. Here. Everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, I think this group needs to, and I know I've said it before, and hopefully you don't mind me saying it again, you've done many great things. And when Brandon and I were compiling the list of items in association with the terms of reference, it was really neat to see how you have accomplished many of the items on there, or made a significant impact so far. And I certainly don't want to say accomplished, because you may have ideas of more items. So certainly I wasn't suggesting that it was done, but you have made an impact in various areas. So this is a rough document. There's a few suggestions of some things that we'd like to do. You'll notice like the first page kind of just gives the background of the fact that you first met on May 26, 2021. And so it just kind of gives a background. As well as then we jump into the mandate. So the current mandate of the committee details all of the items here on the left and the action taken to date. So I'm guessing that you've probably read through all of these, so I I won't go through them all. Maybe we can discuss any that anyone has any questions on, as well as then further down in the document, there's the scope of work, and that was again taken right from the terms of reference and detailing all of the items that was included by council in that document for the terms of reference or for the scope of work. And then we also included a table again, the initiative, for example, land acknowledgement. This group made a recommendation to council to have a land acknowledgement read at every council committee and board meeting. And then the status, it's completed. We had Mr. Chuck Commanda, who is the author, read the land acknowledgement at the inaugural meeting on September 27, 2021, committee of the whole meeting. So each, you'll notice that we've included each kind of item to date. And if there's any that you think that maybe we've missed, if you could let me know, and we'll certainly include them. So again, we're just seeking direction from the group. The final thing is on the last page, member testimonials. I was wondering, it'd be lovely to have a group photo, but with COVID, I don't know that we could maybe do that. So just wondering if anyone would volunteer to send me a picture of you and a testimonial of why you joined this group, or anything that you'd like to say about this task force and the initiatives to date. So just a small quote that we'd include in the document. And so, yeah, again, basically just seeking your input. And then what we would do is, once this group finalizes this document, a recommendation would be to bring it forward to council, just so that they can see where you're at. And as noted, it does note in the terms of reference that we do bring forward a document at, it was 6 months in, but we're a little bit later, but I think council will understand with that as well. So I will leave it at that. If you have any questions, or if you want me to go through each section, or if there's anything you want to add, certainly we'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Nadine. Just leave it up there, maybe scroll
Sure.
down the page of recommendations.
Sure.
That's probably the key points to focus on here. And I'll open the floor to any discussion. Chris?
Hi, I wanted to just share in our beginning stages when we were talking about the garden, by the way, it's remarkable what Charlene has created as far as a draft image for the garden. We talked about having a heart, and I went through the diagram and reading about it. I was able to be in touch with Kincaid's, and they...
Can I pause you for a moment? That's the next item on our agenda.
What's that?
That is the next item on our agenda.
Right.
You don't mind waiting to all those for that? We'll discuss that as one item separate from the report.
How about money and funding then, Mayor Panko? Because that's one thing that is kind of all tied in, that I think we need additional funding. And I think if I read right, because forgive me, I can't see the small print as easily. I really think we need to have funds for cultural and art related projects in addition to the reflection garden. So that's another thing that I wanted to make sure that we add funds outside of the budget that we're going to potentially have approved through the council.
Well, thanks, Chris. And what we'll maybe, Nadine, before our next meeting, we can check to see within the 2022 budget where there are funds for events or art installations, and see if there's anything further we need to seek support from council for.
Sure. Yep.
Chris, do you have any further comments on this before we see your hand still up? No. Other comments from members? Michelle?
No, I think it's great. I think when we continue on to talk about the next item on the agenda, I think, and the dollar piece, I think that covers off understanding what's left for us. But this document itself is pretty significant if we really think about that. And the fact that there's been so many delegations coming and speaking to us and sharing experiences. And I think it's wonderful that it's going to go to council as a mid-year report.
Super, thank you. Okay, anyone else? So Nadine, thank you for putting together this very comprehensive report. What I would like to do is have a motion from the task force that we endorse the report and forward it to council for further consideration. But I need someone who want to move that motion, please. Janelle, seconded by
Guys,
thank you. All in favor? Oh, sorry, Nadine, go ahead first.
No, I just was hoping that, sorry, you can finish that vote and then I'll ask the question.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, thanks everyone.
I'm
Nadine?
just hoping maybe someone would commit, if you could let me know in the next couple of days, if you would be willing to share a photo and a quote that we can include, just so we can finalize the document. And then what I'll do is just circulate it to the group before it goes to council, and certainly let you know when that goes forward, if that's okay.
I can do that.
I would like if multiple or
Yeah, if everybody wants to, I'd love to have everyone's photo.
might do that. I think that would be great. I think it speaks volumes if we all share our support.
Mayor Pinko, maybe I should note, if you're uncomfortable having a photo, a quote will do as well. You know, I think it'd be nice to have everybody's input and personal input in that document. So, and that was a great recommendation from our council representatives on the committee to include that too. So I think I need to acknowledge their idea to include that. So thank you.
When do you need?
Character that is quite flattering. I prefer to submit. It might bring a little bit of levity to the group too. So how about that, Nadine? Would that work? Looks
Sure.
just like.
Sure. You know, if everyone could maybe send, if you're able to send me something maybe by the end of next week, I think that should give enough time for everybody. I'll send out a reminder and we can get that moving forward to council.
Thank you. Tim, does that answer your question?
That it does. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the final item on our agenda, the area of reflection, and I don't think Charlene is here, unfortunately. So, Nadine, perhaps do you have the diagram handy?
Hold up here.
Because I know there are members here who were not in attendance when we discussed it in November, I believe it was. But the so after we had endorsement from the task force, we've had interim discussions with staff, and with the consideration primarily of two locations, Duck Island or Turtle Island. And Duck Island is owned by Parks Canada. Turtle Island is owned by the town. Both are part of the basin, or I guess either fully in the basin or part of the basin. And so in discussion with staff, we know we need some more clarity on some of these points. In other words, if we're going to use natural rock as an example for the seated area, then do we paint that, or how do we accommodate that? So the location-wise, we know that if it's going to be on Duck Island, and there's some discussion that Duck Island is already a suitable place. The powwow has been held there in the past. There has been, I think, a sacred fire location there during the powwow. So it's important that might be an area of consideration. However, we know feedback from Parks Canada indicates that if we're going to have any excavation to accommodate any part of this, we need an archaeological study to ensure that there be no disruption of any artifacts that could be buried in the ground there. So it's a little bit more longer road to approval, and some potentially some challenges. We wouldn't have the same challenges on Duck Island. We also had discussions of would Centennial Park be appropriate because it's more accessible. So there's a few pieces here that we need greater clarity on. So I don't think we're gonna have a decision on this today, because I'd like to have Charlene here before I make a final decision. However, I'd like to get some feedback from the group that is here today as to location, as to I guess Charlene's proposal, and your thoughts. Chris?
Personally, I'm very touched and honored by the and grandfather teachings being used in the reflection garden. My sharing previous to getting here was because we had spoken about getting a heart, and interestingly enough, I had remembered that Finlay's did have a granite heart 12-inch by 12-inch heart-shaped marker, which they can actually get in orange granite or red granite. But I had asked the question about would it be possible to possibly have a ribbon or an orange shirt engraved. And I actually got a very generous response to show how our community really is interested in working together, that they would be willing to freely offer the engraving as their gift to reconciliation if we chose to get the heart symbol. I would like to just see that that would be the one other feature to put forward.
Okay.
The group can decide what the etching would be. But I mean, it was very, very generous without asking in any way. It was automatically offered.
Great. Thanks, Chris. That's a great suggestion. Peter?
I just wanted to talk again about process. I think finding the best place, and if it takes longer, that's okay with me. The design is beautiful, and Chris's additions I welcome. So I think we're on to something really wonderful. So finding the right home for this is important. And if because we're working with Parks Canada, if we have to, it slows us down a little bit, that's okay. Struggles and things worth doing take time. And so I'm okay with if the group really believes that that is the location, then I'm okay with taking the extra time. It's not a race to get it up. It's a race to do it right.
Yeah, great point, Peter. And with Duck Island, if it was something that was at grade, the archaeological study would not be required. So there's a number of, I guess, balls at play here, depending on how this would be constructed as well. Further feedback?
I'd just like to say I completely agree with Peter. I mean, let's spend the time and find the right place as opposed to just sticking it anywhere. I mean, don't get me wrong, Duck Island, Turtle Island, wonderful locations. But if you think about the accessibility of it, not so accessible. One option may be the far end of Lower Reach or either end of Lower Reach Park. Just sort of bouncing ideas around or thinking aloud right now. But, you know, those are two possibilities that easily accessible for everyone from any area of town as well.
Great. Thanks, guys.
And I wonder if there's an opportunity to actually engage the community in this conversation. We've gotten here, and now maybe if we heard from the community about their thoughts, giving not necessarily a wide open question, but a closed-end sort of survey people could go on the town website, explaining where we're going with it and what their thoughts would be. Just accessibility, absolutely. An archaeological study could put us months and months and months behind. So just looking at all those other factors as well.
Great comments, Michelle. And yes, obviously we have a tool, Speak Up Smith Falls tool that we could probably leverage for this. We'd also reached out to Paul Meridew at SFDCI to get some guidance from the Indigenous Studies students there. So that's something else that, while it's not completed yet, hopefully we'll be able to get some feedback. Additional comments? I don't see any hands. The other thing perhaps we can do too is get an updated rendering that would include maybe some done in color and maybe a little bit more refined that may reflect maybe different dimensions what this would actually look like. And I'm have to reach out to Charlene on that and see if we can enter any other resources that could be helpful. Okay. Thanks, Kaz. And I think we're getting close to wrapping up here. Anyway, we were supposed to adjourn at 10:30. We're a little bit beyond that, but I'll just, any further questions? Chris, I see your hand up. Is that for a new question, new comment or question? Oh, Chris, you're muted. Oh, Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry. Should we go? I wanted to ask the committee with a ribbon so that it represents multiple communities inside the heart.
Sorry, say again, please, Chris.
I wanted to ask the committee if we should go with the design of a ribbon inside the orange heart so that it represents multiple communities and honors multiple people of both female and male and children.
So it's a great point. Maybe part of the rendering that could be included. Okay.
Right.
Anyone have final comments before we wrap up? Again, Aaron, thank you. Tremendous value you bring to our community, and full respect for all the work that you do and the guidance you're able to provide for us. So we look to grow and be a better ally through you. Okay, if there's nothing further, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment. Moved by Janelle, seconded by Peter. You put your hand. Okay, Alice, thank you. All in favor?